So, let's talk about what life is. So this is gonna get a little bit confusing maybe for some. It's still kind of confusing to me. If you don't know by now, which I don't have many people watching my videos at the moment, but perhaps in the future maybe some will. Maybe some, maybe nobody will. It doesn't matter to me. This is just for my own records at the moment. I like to think about things. I like to think that sometimes I can be called a philosopher maybe about certain things. I try and take a neutral ground for the most part, or a logical standpoint. I like to kind of think of myself as like Spock with more compassion. Or actually Spock does, so maybe like him. So, let's talk about what life is. So we know that there's people walking around every day. They're all alive, right? The ground's alive, the birds are alive, the animals are alive, whatever. But I'm gonna bounce around here a little bit like I normally do on these. So you can only perceive what is absolutely right now. You cannot perceive a point in time that you are not currently experiencing. And so for that reason, past does not necessarily exist to you. While history may exist, you know, because people kept records of it in books and whatnot, you don't know anybody that knew Napoleon Bonaparte. You don't know anybody that knew Genghis Khan. Those people are all long dead. So those people, while they do help to shape the world today, if they existed, we're going to talk about that in a different video. We're not going to go into that theory right now. But they don't really influence your daily life. What Genghis Khan specifically did on August 31st, whatever year, is not going to pop into your mind. Whether he took a shit, he had a great meal, or whatever. It's not going to pop into your mind. It's not something that currently affects you. So you can't focus on the past. You can't even perceive the past. You can only read about the past. You can only hear what others have told you about the past. And as to the future, it's never going to be what you think. Never has been, never will be. Unless you're like a psychic medium or something like that, you're not going to be able to accurately identify what's going to happen in the next 30 seconds. Now you can say with almost a certainty like, hey, I'm cooking macaroni and cheese right now, in the next 30 seconds I'm still going to be cooking macaroni and cheese. Sure, you can probably do that. But other than that minuscule, minute piece of information, you can't identify anything except for right now. And our brains are so complex that we can't identify anything further than that anyways. And I'm not saying that we're dumb. You heard me say we're complex. I'm saying we're so complex that we don't even understand how to use our own brains. And so we're not going to be able to perceive something that our brains can't accurately comprehend. Time is one of those things that's a man-made construct. Time only exists as long as we exist. If humans were ever to die, time would cease as we know it. Time is not indefinite. Time is defined by the existence of the human race. Until we find out if there's aliens or something else out there, we can't say that time is indefinite. That's one of the things that's not indefinite. When the human race expires, so does our record of time and our perceived perception of time. So you can only perceive right now. So imagine this. I'm seeing out of my eyes right now. You're seeing out of yours. But by the time you see out of your eyes, I'll have already done seeing out of mine right now. I am to you the past. This is history. This is not the present for you. For me, it would be my future in which you watch this. So essentially, you watching this, me knowing that you're going to watch this, is me essentially perceiving the future that this will be watched by an individual. So that's a slight, like, you know, like you can perceive the future that way. But let's talk about what life is. And to do this how I want to do it, I think, let me first start by saying something I almost wholeheartedly believe. All that science is our dreams. It's our desire to understand. It's our longing to figure it out. To get full comprehension. That's what science is. Science is the attempt to get an answer. And not any answer. We want the answer. We want the answer of where did we come from and why are we here? And where are we going? And what makes us tick? So, with that being said, in my opinion, that's what it is. Life is meaningless. Not saying that you shouldn't love your family, that you shouldn't love your animals, or anything like that. Please don't misinterpret my statement as being in a political manner, because I don't give a shit about political correctness, and I certainly don't give a shit about offending anybody. If you get offended, maybe you shouldn't watch. But life is meaningless, essentially. Imagine a treadmill, okay? Or not a treadmill, but an assembly belt, right? A tread belt. And imagine that there's light sockets on it. Infinite amounts of light sockets, right? That you can't even count that high. And there's a light bulb screwed into each one. Well, as we all know, light bulbs eventually burn out. And so these light bulbs generate light around us. And so when one of these light bulbs go out, the area around it will be dimmer, right? For a little while. Because eventually the light bulb next to our light bulb, imagine the light bulb's representative of people, actually, sorry. Each light bulb represents a person on the planet. When one of those light bulbs go out and they die, it's going to make the light bulbs around it dimmer for a period of time. The light bulb next to it eventually will die out too, and so will all the other light bulbs around it. Until that area of the tread is dark. But skip about 100 light bulbs down, and those light bulbs will never have experienced a reduction in light or a reduction in heat as per the other light bulbs going out. So it will essentially not affect them as you think it might. If you look through family albums or go through your family tree, you're going to see people in your family history that are dead, that have been dead for hundreds of years. And at the end of the day, we all have family that's been dead for almost thousands of years. We all do. We all came from somewhere. Unless you're that one robot that's watching this or whatever. But those people have no bearing on how we feel today. Our opinions are anything. They may have changed the course of history at some point in time and changed how the outcome of the world is for us today. But on a daily basis, on your mind is not, Great Uncle Al was a scientist and he invented peanut butter or whatever. It doesn't matter. Right? You don't think about that thing on a regular daily basis. That person's light bulb has expired, and the people that person mattered to have expired, and the people that they have mattered to have expired, and the people that they matter to expired, and etc., 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 along down the way to where you never were experiencing their light. However, I tend to believe that that's almost not exactly how this works. Let's think of it in another aspect, okay? If you take a worm, right? Well, just an earthworm. And you look at it, it's got two ends and a center, right? If you cut that earthworm in half, it will regenerate itself, depending on the conditions, to create two worms. You essentially have created two smaller worms out of one larger worm, which can both independently function and move around. Now, in another aspect, let's say you have an octopus. You cut an octopus's tentacle off, it's still going to live for a while, right? It's still going to squirm around and move, and that's nerves and things like that, and muscle memory. But technically what's considered to be alive is it's moving, it can do things. The octopus is still going to be alive. But, I mean, actually I like the worm one better, sorry. You take those two worms, right, essentially, that you cut, wait a month, cut them both in half again. Now you got 4 worms out of 1 life. Right? Now, wait a little while, about a month again, and cut all 4 of those again in half. Now they're going to regenerate and you're going to grow 16. Right? So, carry that on infinitely. And what you have is the same instance of life, or the same life in multiple instances. And so what life is, even though it's meaningless, because at the end of the day, you're gone anyways, but you're not really gone. We are not separate. We are not different entities. We are all the same. We are all one life. We are all a part of our universe. We are just separate instances of the same life. Life should not be thought of as an individual prospect. It should not be thought of as a possessed thing. Life is one. We are just an instance of. So life started out as one whole. It was split. It became 2 pieces. Those 2 pieces were split. It became 4. Those 4 were split. They became 8. Etc. Okay? Just like the worm. You cut the worm in half, it's going to have another piece. They're going to regenerate. They're going to grow into 2 separate worms. Cut those 2 in half, you're going to have more. Do that infinite amount of times. You're going to keep having more and more and more worms. Now, there's something to be said about the lifetime of a worm. They eventually do expire. But you can probably do that a lot of times before that worm expires. That's an example of how all life is one. We are just separate instances. If that's not proof enough, I implore you to disprove this theory. I implore you to disprove anything I've said. Anything I do say. That's fine. But I want you to find another instance. Just think about it. Think about this as deep as you can. That we are all one. Every bird, every fish, every worm, every human, every baby, every cactus, every blade of grass is all one. And this actually works with plants too. If you cut a limb off a plant and plant it, it will grow itself. That is multiple lives off one living thing. And so it makes no sense to say that life is possessed, because it clearly can be split. It can clearly be halved. It can clearly be given freely. It's not something you own. You are just a part of it. You are just a piece of what life is. Life is not at all separate. We are just different instances of the same. Now, does this make sense to you? If not, I'm sorry. I hope that perhaps this will open some eyes and open your mind a little bit to figuring out the possibilities of what life is, and making you think a little bit more about what you're doing with the time that you have in your own instance. Because at the end of the day, imagine it like droplets in a pool. All of those droplets equal a pool. When you pull all the droplets out, the pool is empty, right? But the pool is constantly being replenished by droplets returning. While you're a droplet, before you return back to the pool, what are you going to do? What are you going to think? How are you going to feel? Is it worth doing anything, feeling or thinking anything, or changing anything, knowing that eventually you're just going to go back into the pool? Perhaps, because if you pay attention to the water cycle, once you evaporate back into the clouds, you rain back down. We are just an instance of life. That's all. But maybe that's not how you think. That's for you to decide.